Continuing on from the discussion regarding the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, there is a famous quote from Immanuel Kant which sums up the attitude of the Enlightenment, which is have courage to use your own reason. That is the motto of the Enlightenment. To begin with some of these great thinkers of this era, we turn to the French, with the likes of Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, etc. The first of these great thinkers is Montesquieu. Montesquieu's theory of the separation of powers into executive, legislative and judicial, each of which are separate from each other, and the power of the sovereign, it was revolutionary for the time, and it paved the way for the various constitutions adopted by nations across the world, and many of them are still in use today. He was a French man of letters who wrote the iconic Spirit of the Laws in 1748, and it is often cited as representing the spirit of both the American and French revolutions. Another key thinker was Voltaire, who wrote extensively various plays, poems, novels, essays, and via these he expressed his philosophical beliefs to the masses. He was very critical of the Catholic Church and its dogmatic nature, and he advocated for the separation of the French state and church. He was a fierce advocate for freedom of speech and critical of all religious institutions. He was very famous for his use of satire to mask his true beliefs. Especially in his most famous work, Candide. Another member of this famous group of enlightened Parisians was Rousseau, who was a famous philosopher, writer and composer. And his novel on education was instrumental in educational reform in France at the time. Rousseau's Confessions, which were published in 1789, was the first major published work of autobiography and legitimated subjective writing as a valid art form. Rousseau, furthermore, was a political theorist. He was preoccupied with injustice and inequality in French society. His texts, The Discourse on Inequality and the Social Contract, are considered some of the most influential works to come out of the Enlightenment. Diderot shared the mission of these other philosophers from the French people and made an incredible contribution in this era by co-founding, editing, and contributing to the encyclopedia. This encyclopedia was a 35-volume work created between 1751 and 1772 with the aim of incorporating all of the world's knowledge into one text, and for many represents the overall project and indeed the ethos of the Enlightenment era. One more notable Frenchman was Condorcet, born 1742 and passed away 1794, who used mathematics to inform his work in political science, creating the Condorcet method of calculating which candidate is most likely to win an election. He was very passionate about the benefits of a liberal economy and constitutional monarchy, and championed equal rights at a time when women and people of colour were deemed second-class citizens in France. All five of these French philosophers shared a common goal: to develop a society based on reason, natural law, scientific endeavour, which was not repressed by oppressive doctrines of the Catholic Church. Almost all members of the aristocracy, the philosophers, were not necessarily revolutionaries. Neither did they put class equality at the forefront of their agenda, but the ideas they promoted in their writings directly challenged the power of the monarchy and the Catholic Church. This very obviously paved the way for the French Revolution. Another important figure that arose was René Descartes, born 1596 to 1650, and he passed away in the year 1650. He was a contemporary of Francis Bacon and is considered the father of modern Western philosophy. His influence on the Enlightenment was profound. In his young adulthood, he pursued a military career, living in Holland, Italy and France, before accepting an invitation from Queen Christina of Sweden to write plays for her court. He was a mathematician and a physicist, and he believed the material world was amenable to mathematical analysis and that the universe was ruled by a comprehensible cosmic order. He favoured Bacon's deductive method in his various works, and his scientific works were considered dangerous enough to be banned by the monarch at the time in France. Descartes argued for a dualistic understanding of existence, that human beings are composed of both matter and spirit, and thus he coined the famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am." René Descartes and his work challenged the religious dogma of the time, but he himself was religious and believed in the existence of God. Like Descartes, other Enlightenment philosophers such as Newton, Wolff, and Locke took a moderate approach to religion and attempted to straddle the line between traditional systems of faith and new Enlightened philosophies. They sought a reform of the traditional ways of thinking rather than a complete destruction of them and of the way of life in Europe. And these philosophers were challenged by those who sought to destroy the status quo completely, which shows that the Enlightenment thinkers weren't just one monolith and came on a spectrum. Amongst the English, there were many famous figures such as Francis Bacon, Thomas Hobbes, and John Locke. Francis Bacon, born in the year 1561 and passed away in the year 1626, was a member of the English aristocracy, a philosopher, a writer, a statesman, and a scientist. He died before the Enlightenment really took hold across Europe, but his work in this scientific field influenced many of the Enlightenment's key philosophers. Most importantly, he developed the inductive method of scientific inquiry. This approach, which seems common sense today, stressed that observation and reason are the two components needed to come to a conclusion. He is often known as the father of empiricism, and he introduced the concept of scientific method during a time when faith-based solutions were offered for practical problems. Hobbes was a philosopher. He was born in the year 1588 and passed away in the year 1679, and a political theorist whose text, published in 1651, Leviathan, is credited with jolting the English Enlightenment into being. Whilst he believed in an absolute monarchy, he was also a liberal and wrote on the rights of the individual, social equality, and the necessity of a political system which is based on the consent of its nation's people. His controversial book, The Leviathan, posited that all human beings are inherently self-driven and that political communities must be built on a social contract, ideas that inform political philosophy till this day. John Locke, born in the year 1632 and passed away in the year 1704, began his career as an Oxford academic, but in 1667 he became personal secretary and physician to the Earl of Shaftesbury and grew deeply involved in politics. Together, Shaftesbury and Locke sought to decrease the power of the monarchy in Britain and restore the Catholic Church as the main religion. He was a supporter of the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and became a major beneficiary of its success. His writings are preoccupied with attempts to find a middle way between understandings of traditional religion and modern science. His most famous publication is An Essay Concerning Human Understanding in 1690, where he stated that knowledge was acquired through sensory and not divine means, and that only certain things could be known to be fact, laying the foundation for intellectual humility. Then we arrive at the Scots, which include the likes of Francis Hutcheson, Adam Smith, and John Hume. Francis Hutcheson, born in the year 1694 and passing away in the year 1746, was a key member of the early Scottish Enlightenment. He was born in Ireland, he studied and lived in Glasgow, then he returned to his native land where he opened a private school. He wrote a series of well-received essays on ethics and aesthetics, and he was invited to fill the coveted role of Chair of Moral Philosophy at the University of Glasgow. His main contribution was his writings on moral sense, a follow-up to Shaftesbury's earlier doctrine. He famously said that virtue could be defined as the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Adam Smith, a student of Hutcheson, who himself was born 1723 and passed away in the year 1790, was the founder of liberal economic theory. He grew up in a respectable family just north of Edinburgh and studied at Oxford, but before taking on a teaching position at the University of Glasgow. He travelled in Europe as tutor to the Duke of Buccleuch. Smith met Voltaire and other philosophers who greatly inspired his later writings. In 1776, Smith published Wealth of Nations, the text that founded modern economic liberalism. His work recognized the force of self-interest in economics while calling for a moral sense that was informed by sympathy and beneficence, a revolutionary idea at the time. David Hume contributed to the Enlightenment, born in the year 1711 and passed away in the year 1776, in ways which led to a lasting impact on Western philosophy as a whole. He was born into Edinburgh gentry, and he worked in a number of different jobs throughout his life, including tutor, clerk for a sugar company, librarian, and secretary. In 1766, he offered Rousseau refuge in England and supported his extensive writings, but eventually he fell out with him. Hume wrote The History of England, published in 6 volumes between 1754 and 1762 to public acclaim, and his main philosophical contribution to the Enlightenment was A Treatise of Human Nature, being an attempt to introduce the experimental method of reasoning into moral subjects.